Howdy readers, I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse, and I had decided that I was going to make a video addressing the whole Dr. Seuss controversy. Before I saw Brian from Bookish, before I saw his video yesterday, and before I saw Madison at Reading Wayfarer's video yesterday. And but I watched both of their videos, and I will link them both below. I wanted to see what they had to say before I said my piece. And it occurred to me I was going to just kind of make it part of the ramble that I plan to shoot tonight. But then, I got to thinking that I wanted to make sure I didn't leave anything out that I wanted to say. Or if I left anything out, that it wouldn't be much by accident. And so I'm doing with this video what I've only done 2 or 3 times in the past. And I wrote a script for it last night before bed. It wasn't much, it's not heavily revised or anything. I just dashed it off before I went to bed, and I read it back through once, changed 2 or 3 sentences a little bit, and that's it. And so, without further ado, I'm going to read to you my thoughts on the Dr. Seuss controversy. As many, if not all, of you know, on Tuesday, March 2nd, the estate of Dr. Seuss released a statement, which I'll link below, making clear that 6 of the children's authors' titles will no longer be published, owing to each of them containing illustrations that, quote, portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong. The 6 books are And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street, If I Ran the Zoo, McElligot's Pool, On Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Egg Super, and The Cat's Quizzer. There has been an uproar over the estate's decision, primarily from conservative politicians and pundits declaiming cancel culture, cancel culture. Liberal commentators have generally been fine with the decision. I struggle to know where to begin in laying out my own thoughts on this issue. As Brian from Bookish pointed out in his Saturday Hodgepodge video yesterday morning, most conservatives have been brandishing this perceived cancellation of Dr. Seuss, this perceived gutting of America's childhood, as a smokescreen, distracting their irrational bases from looking head-on at the more pressing problem of policing reforms being debated in the halls of Congress. Brian will get no disagreement from me on that score. The conservative politicians are taking a news story and bending it with their warped gravity to fulfill a specific need. I would guess that none of these dipshits have given more than 60 seconds of thought to what their rationale actually is beyond how it can serve their own agenda, now, in this precise moment. Likewise, it seems to me that liberal apologists for the Seuss Estate's decision are focused not on what the far-reaching implications of that decision might be, but entirely on how it fits like a puzzle piece with liberal causes trending now, in this precise moment. These apologists are saying it was the estate's decision. No one is being canceled by any external liberal force. To which I would say, true. I think labeling what has been done as, quote, cancel culture in its most recent iteration is a misnomer. However, the estate didn't reach this decision on its own. It reached this decision in collaboration with, one might even say under the auspices of, quote, a panel of experts, including educators. Learning this put me immediately in mind of these so-called sensitivity readers employed by publishing houses to make sure manuscripts are towing a prescribed politically correct line. I'm appalled at the idea of a novelist conforming his or her writing to the notion of upsetting as few people as possible. But to return to the Dr. Seuss kerfuffle, this was not the estate's decision. It was a decision made by an estate likely having been condescended to by a panel less interested in what a work of art communicates about its author's beliefs, about its era's attitudes, than about the degree to which it has offended and may continue to offend. Guardian columnist Lili Wilkinson, along with many others, have urged people to calm down, arguing the logic that these 6 books were not widely known or loved anyway. So what harm can having them ushered out of print do? They weren't the cat in the hat, after all, Wilkinson tells us, despite the cat in the hat's, quote, design being linked to racist traditions of blackface minstrel entertainment. So at what juncture will the Seuss Estate, considering the cat in the hat's relationship to the history of blackface, call for an end to publishing the Seuss book that is widely known, that is widely loved? If the aim is to erase children's books that are racially and culturally insensitive, why stop at 6? And why stop at Dr. Seuss? What panel of sensitivity experts is whispering into the ear of the Laura Ingalls Wilder estate right now? Some of you are likely objecting to my use of the word erase. Years ago, one of my closest friends asked me in an exchange I blogged about, if certain passages in the Bible are contentious, are used as platforms to substantiate bigoted worldviews or even acts of violence, might Christians not treat the Bible then as a living document, open to revision, excision, the paring away of behavioral codes incompatible with contemporary life? To which I answered, in part, we cannot strike passages condoning the stoning of people to death from the Bible, because to do so robs the teachings of Christ in Matthew 5:38 and 39, and the example of Christ in John 8:1 through 11, of their revolutionary vision. We cannot strike passages that seem to indict homosexuality, because to do so would discourage the discipline of close reading for meaning, and the discipline of looking beyond the Bible itself for cultural context. For instance, the account in Genesis 19 of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is not a judgment on homosexuality, but on rape. Excising what we find offensive or hurtful or insensitive or worse from a text, from a culture, from a tradition, devalues our collective and individual transcending of that material, or discourages us all, collectively and individually, from doing the hard work of wrestling with that which is offensive, hurtful, insensitive, etc. Some people are saying, but it's not erasure. There will still be copies on eBay for the super rich, and until there aren't, there will still be copies in libraries until those copies fall victim to removal, culling, or theft. The end game behind the panel advising the Seuss Estate is for these books to vanish from lived cultural experience 2 or 3 generations down the road. Erasure, as if they never existed at all. The end game is also the beginning. This movement to encourage or strong-arm estates, publishing houses, movie studios, and streaming platforms to cease the release of works of art considered out of step with admittedly welcome and enlightened cultural norms could eventually see the erasure of Blake Edwards' adaptation of Breakfast at Tiffany's, Jonathan Demme's adaptation of The Silence of the Lambs, Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove, D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, leaving his own cinematic riposte intolerance without the cultural context on which it was conceived, the Little House on the Prairie novels, Sylvia Plath's collection of poetry, Ariel, and the list goes on and on. This movement could result in the erasure of these works of art in large part because no one is standing up and saying no. And every time an estate or publisher or studio or streaming platform capitulates, the movement, a movement, it must be stated, intent on a long-term revision of cultural memory, becomes more powerful, is imbued with a keener sense of authority. Do I think the images in the Seuss volumes that have been withdrawn from the public are racist? I do. Does my wanting those volumes to continue to be published make me a racist? It does not. And if you think otherwise, do us both a favor and unsubscribe to my channel now to save me the time of blocking you after you've called me a racist. I'm a believer in preserving art, even when it is inflammatory and immoral. I believe that to want to preserve a work of art does not amount to a tacit endorsement of it. I believe that children are smarter than we often give them credit for being. I believe that parents and school teachers should be encouraged to have difficult conversations with their children and students about race and bigotry, and that folding children's books featuring an illustrative style with which they're intimate into those conversations can only help. I believe that if a booktuber wants to do a series of videos on race in American pop culture, he or she should be able to order and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street from Amazon to feature in his or her video without taking out a second mortgage on his or her house to pay for the book. I believe that conservative politicians and pundits would be wise to save their indignation for that point in time when they've learned how to use their brains. And I believe liberals should start taking the long view more often than they do, however easily the convenience of contemporary concern figures into patting ourselves and each other on the back. Slippery slopes are called slippery for a reason. And that's it. I'll see you guys tonight with my ramble. Adios.